Rather than enjoying the miracle of life, humankind has generally chosen the opposite. They have tried to understand it. More specifically, since the first caveman scribbled on the walls of his home, humankind has questioned what comes afterwards. Broadly, there are three schools of thought. Some think there's nothing, logical, if a bit dull. Some don't believe in, like heaven and hell and all that stuff, but feel, like there must be something out there. Like, death can't be the end, right? This is the most insufferable school of thought, and incidentally makes up most of the world's population. Finally, some believe that after death our souls are weighed and our lives evaluated. We are then sent to either heaven or hell to live out the rest of eternity. Almost by complete fluke, they are spot on. Bertie Masterbean flopped down, exhausted, on one of the flimsy plastic chairs lined up against the wall. There were a few others, but most seemed preoccupied. One man seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing upwards as though waiting for a bus. Another had fallen asleep. After a short while, his name was called and a laminated brochure thrust into his hands as he was herded through the double doorway. "Welcome to Purgatory" was written in Comic Sans at the top of the cover. Beneath a set of scales was a short note. "Tell us how we did today. Your afterlife experience matters to us, and we're dying to hear your thoughts. Please fill out the post-mortem satisfaction survey on the 66th page and we'll be eternally grateful." Perhaps it would be all right, Bertie rationalized. After all, it wasn't like he was the worst person who had ever existed. In this respect, he was correct. Bertie was not the worst person to have ever existed. He was the fourth. There were three people worse than Bertie to have ever existed, all of whom happened to be men. The worst woman to have ever existed was the Wicked Witch of the West Coast, who abducted hundreds of children and forced them to read her terrible movie scripts. Those who survived went insane and were always found on a cliffside or mountaintop, babbling about lazy characterization and lack of stakes. In another blow to female representation, the Wicked Witch falls well outside the top 10. She is languishing at 16th between the evil Captain Bloodbeard, Scourge of the Seven Seas, and Henry Kissinger. The worst non-binary person to have ever existed is unknown, as none have yet been sent to hell. Lord Sigurd the Seal Clubber takes third place. As a youth, he opened a resort outside Uppsala to pursue his passion. Though a commercial failure, it ran for 50 years until the Viking king Eric Bloodaxe closed it down, describing the practice as uncouth, unsavory, and medieval. In second place is Walter Brideswell of North Somerset, serial killer, organized criminal, and, briefly in his youth, management consultant. All were enough to condemn him to hell, but he made the top 3 when he founded the Ocean Warming Fund. This was a lobbying group aiming to accelerate global warming so that Walter could holiday at the seaside without having to go via France. In first place, it's him. You know who I'm talking about. The person you thought of first when we started on this tangent. He's a number 1. The worst person to have ever existed, obviously. Bertie was the 4th worst person to have ever existed. Therefore, when he was summoned to the chamber to have his case heard, he wasn't overly optimistic. He clawed desperately for anything that might count in his favor. There was the time he donated $200,000 to sit next to Brad Pitt at a charity dinner. Bertie thought long and hard. He'd slow down for a cat once. That might be a bit thin. As he reached the door, he was shaken out of his reverie by a skeleton wearing a suit and a barrister's wig. Bertie was surprised because it was a skeleton wearing a suit and a barrister's wig. He was even more surprised when the figure began to speak. "Hello," the skeleton peered down at a small bundle of notes. "Bertie, how do you do?" "I've been better." Yes. As I recall, it is a rather trying experience, Death." The figure paused to readjust his jaw. "How was it for you?" "It was all so sudden. One moment I was sat in a submarine with a couple pals, then—" "Hang on. Who are you?" "Oh, forgive me." The figure held out a dusky, skeletal hand for Bertie to shake. "I'm Baldric." Bertie stared at him, bemused, and Baldric stared back, emotionless. In fairness, it is hard to express emotion without eyes, lips, or skin. "All right, I'll try again. What are you doing here?" "Ah, good question, sir," Baldric rattled, as though to a dog who'd located a ball. "I'll be your legal representative for the hearing." "You're my lawyer?" exclaimed Bertie. "Got it in one, sir. Yes, I'm up from hell this afternoon to help you make your case." Bertie paused for a long time. That said, it was a short pause for somebody who'd just discovered that their fate for the rest of time was in the hands of a skeletal stranger. "Do you think I have a chance of making it to heaven?" Baldric stared at him. This was a long pause, an excruciating pause that carried the weight of all eternity. Eventually, he spoke. "There's good news and there's bad news." "All right, give me the good news." Baldric widened his jaw to speak. "No. Stop. Give me the bad news first." "As you wish, sir. This morning, I read your file, And the bad news is, well, it's bad. You were very bad by almost every possible metric. In fact, some of the guys in the office were saying you'd have a shot at the top 10. The top 10. It doesn't matter. The point is you are a very difficult soul to defend. But I always thought there's no such thing as bad people. Only bad deeds. Afraid not, sir. You were a bad person who did a lot of bad deeds. I see. Bertie paused for a moment. He'd been told similar by various wives, employees, judges, and one time, the penguin keeper at Chester Zoo. But somehow, it struck a chord when put this bluntly. What about the good news? Good news? You said there was good news. Ah, yes, the good news. Baldric shuffled his notes around and pulled out a roll of parchment. A couple of months ago, they changed the protocol due to overcrowding. Overcrowding? Indeed, sir. I don't know what's going on down there, but far too many of you are being born, and far too many of you are dying. Therefore, Edict 54,280 was released. It stipulates that it is the responsibility of both places' representatives to argue why each soul should not be sent there. Baldric, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I wouldn't expect you to, sir, his wispy voice dripping with condescension, the only emotion he seemed capable of expressing. The point is, both places are overcrowded. Therefore, each hearing now consists of a representative from both places arguing why each soul should go to the other place. But how does that benefit me? Baldric leaned forward and inclined his head conspiratorially. Perhaps, if he had a face, he would have grinned. Why, sir, all the best lawyers are in hell. The hearing chamber was designed and built by a tired, overworked angel who'd lost interest in his career and really let himself go. Although we mustn't be too harsh on him, he had to build over 10,000 of them. There was no roof, just great, looming obsidian pillars reaching up into the inky sky. A stone altar was the only permanent fixture, though it possessed an austere beauty that rendered it fairly incongruous among the other furnishings, a small wooden stool and 2 docks either side of it. Bertie was directed to the small wooden stool. He had to crouch awkwardly to be seated, but he assumed, correctly, that it wasn't worth complaining. Besides, he was distracted by the murky engravings on the altar before him. Fire, ice, water, earth, blood, and, for reasons incomprehensible to the mortal mind, the number 42. Meanwhile, Baldric set himself up in one of the docks, and another figure came shuffling into the room, entering the dock on the other side. Afternoon, Baldric. Afternoon, Gabe. How was the trip up? Not too bad. The aircon broke halfway up, which was a shame. Then again, I do live in hell, so there was an awkward pause. How was your trip down? Perfect as always. Great. Nobody spoke. Still, Bertie could swear there were whispers coming from somewhere. They seemed to emanate from the corner of the room, but when he looked, there was nothing. Not even a wall, just nothing. Then a voice rang out from the chamber. All rise for the honorable judgmental. Bertie leapt up, pleased at the respite from the hard surface of his awkwardly low stool. The silence remained until a frenetic scuffling was heard coming from behind the altar. Suddenly, a small, wizened, bespectacled face appeared over the top. Sit down, sit down. If we can get through this quickly, we'll all be away by 5 o'clock. His voice was satin, rich and delicate, soft and seamless, tumbling from a mouth that hardly moved as he spoke. Who do we have here? He peered down at Bertie for the first time. Mr. Masterbean. There was a short pause. Oh, for Christ's sakes. This'll take ages. Actually, scratch that last remark. We don't want any trouble upstairs. He muttered to someone behind him. All right, get on with it. Slightly taken aback, the figure called Gabe began to rattle off his preamble. Unsurprisingly, his motion was that Bertie ought to be sent to hell for eternity, plus an additional 3 years for wasting the court's time with his deference. Then the charges began. Count 1, smashing his mother's vase when crawling round the atrium. Count 2, blaming his nanny for the smashing of his mother's vase. Count 3, failing to disclose the truth when his nanny was dismissed for the smashing of his mother's vase. As the excruciating monologue continued, a look of sincere, deep-seated sorrow and repentance did not trouble Bertie's face. Instead, he simply looked bored. The judge was hardly paying attention, and the stool was increasingly uncomfortable, no matter how much Bertie shifted his backside. Count 109, misappropriating monies from the Masterbean pension fund and transferring them to an account named Shithead Stag Do. Count 110, blaming the misappropriation of monies from the Masterbean pension fund on a summer intern named Kevin. Count 111, failing to disclose the truth when Kevin was given a custodial sentence for complex fraud and embezzlement. Bertie let out an exasperated sigh. It occurred to him that this was the first noise he had made since entering. Something about the place inspired silence. He turned to look at Bertie, who, thankfully, looked very alive for a dead man. He was looking over his papers, especially impressive given his lack of eyes, and assiduously scribbling away. Count 132, knowingly purchasing jewelry stolen from the Louvre in Paris. Count 233, attempting to give the jewelry to his secretary, despite assuring his wife there was nothing to worry about. Count 234, unfairly dismissing the aforementioned secretary when she refused to go home with him. All right, I've heard enough. Judge Mental's intervention was so unexpected that Game continued to speak for 30 seconds before realizing he'd been interrupted. This soul is so indefensibly bad that we need not waste any more time. Counsel for the defense, keep it short. Not exactly a fair trial, thought Bertie. Thank you, Your Honor. Bertie was pathetically grateful to hear Baldrick's voice, even if it was the same disinterested rattle as Gabe's. As has been established, my client is a bad person who has done many bad things. Furthermore, he shows no regret for being a bad person who has done many bad things. Good start. However, it is my contention that his impact is a positive one. If it pleases the court, I would like to adduce for evidence from the future. Objection! Gabe's deathly whisper somehow rang around the chamber. Future evidence can only be adduced with prior permission from the court and prior disclosure to the opposing counsel. Indeed, you're right. And if Judge Mental would like to postpone the hearing so that I can obtain the requisite permissions, he is welcome to do so. The judge looked up. Alternatively, we can dispense with the formalities and continue. Proceed, barked Judge Mental. Thank you. The records show that my client founded the Master Bean Scholarship at Worcester College, Oxford, to get more white upper-class men into academia. We know, hissed Gabe. It was going to be count 485. Indeed, replied Baldrick. However, 3 years from now, a Master Bean Scholarship recipient will cure cancer, saving millions of lives. He paused to ensure the judge was paying attention. Therefore, the positive impact of my client's generosity in 3 years' time assuages any damage he may have during his life. Gabe swung his skull around to stare directly at Bertie. That is completely absurd. The court has never been inclined to entertain these loopholes, and this will not change. Certainly not for the sake of this evil, evil soul. Was he becoming slightly flustered? For the first time since dying, Bertie felt a flutter of hope. Surely you can concede that the law is not clear. The law is perfectly clear, Baldrick. We even sent a short, digestible version down to Earth a few millennia ago, explaining how to get into heaven. The rules are helpfully illustrated by a series of stones which cannot possibly be misinterpreted. Gabe, I've had the privilege of liaising with many great legal minds down where I am, and they all agree that the rules governing entry to heaven are completely ambiguous. Poppycock! The two went back and forth, with Baldrick slinging contradictions and hypotheticals at Gabe, who played a straight bat, dismissing any arguments as irrelevant rabbit holes, foolish misinterpretations, and the pointless musings of people who have too much time on their hands. Eventually, he made a small concession. Listen, Baldrick, the basic rule is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The rest are guidelines to assist mortals in achieving this. Furthermore, he continued as Baldrick attempted to interject, they are fundamentally deontological. We'll have none of this ungodly utilitarianism in this court. Thank you very much. Now it was Baldrick's turn to be indignant. Well, that is a radical position. Clearly, it is just for a soul to be judged on the consequences of their actions rather than the actions themselves, and I'm sure Judge Mental would agree. The judge was asleep. Meanwhile, Bertie was growing restless. He wasn't sure he'd ever been seated this long. Even the long-haul flights to Australia had a beverage cart and a few decent films. This was torture. They debated relentlessly, flitting from theology to philosophy to legal principles, and occasionally considering the subjects in between, the subjects so dull they haven't even been named yet. All the while, they strayed further and further from the original purpose. I'm not saying the act of eating an apple is bad, Baldrick. It could have been a banana for all I care, or a plum, or a melon, or a... I know that, Gabe, Baldrick bristled. But that begs the question, what is the point of the story? The point is to obey the word of God and to resist temptation. I would have thought that obvious. Why not just say that? Well, where's the fun in that? At this point, the judge stirred. He peered over at Gabe, his eyes listless and empty. Thank you. I have taken your submissions so far into account. We will adjourn for now and come back tomorrow. The stool was lower now and harder. We're coming back tomorrow? Bertie's voice seemed oddly hollow. The indignant bellow which had dominated many a boardroom had faded. Judgmental peered over at him, and Bertie saw his face for the first time. His hair ought to be long gone, but the wispy white strands remained plastered to his scalp. His skin was parchment. Countless years sad in judgment of the damned were etched into every line of his ancient face, disrupted by only 2 pale lips, which hung open to reveal an irregular set of jagged teeth, jutting out like tombstones. "Oh no, Mr. Masterbean, you won't be coming back tomorrow." Thank God. At this, the judge's eyes glistened. "Does that mean you finally made a decision?" Judgmental let the question hang, savoring it as the skeletal lawyers packed up their briefcases. "There's plenty more to discuss as to your worldly sins, Mr. Masterbean, but you will not come back tomorrow. Instead, you will remain seated and wait for us to resume." At this, Bertie lost it. "What kind of process is this? I am to sit here indefinitely, listening to these 2 insufferable lawyers?" He spat the last word like a slur. "All they've done is talk in circles about every ethical interpretation of all the dodgy stuff I did when I was alive. For goodness' sake, how long will this thing take?" "We expect you to be here indefinitely, Mr. Masterbean," the judge responded helpfully. Bertie huffed in frustration. "This is literally my worst nightmare. I might as well be down in..." He stopped and looked around. Both Gabe and Baldric were staring at him, their skulls cocked slightly to one side. Judgmental's black eyes now bore into him, the dry gray lips contorted into a grotesque smile. Oh. I was testing children in my Glasgow Sunday school class to see if they understood the concept of getting into heaven. I asked them, if I sold my house, my car, had a big jumble sale, and gave all my money to the church, would that get me into heaven? "No," the children answered. "If I cleaned the church every day, mowed the garden, and kept everything tidy, would that get me into heaven?" Again, the answer was no. By now, I was starting to smile. "Well then, if I was kind to animals and gave sweets to all the children and loved my husband, would that get me into heaven?" Again, they all answered no. I was just bursting with pride for them. I continued, "Then how can I get into heaven?" A 6-year-old boy shouted, "You got to be fucking dead!" Have you ever wondered why some people put an angel on top of the Christmas tree? Well, it's an old story from long, long ago. It was a hard year at the North Pole. Most of the reindeer were sick, toy production was behind, elves were grumbling, and Christmas was coming very soon. But from Santa's point of view, the main problem was a different one. No one seemed to be able to make a decision without him. Santa has a large operation, too large for one person to oversee every bit of it, so he relies on trusted subordinates to handle the details. But this year, they were all coming to him about the most trivial things. The constant stream of tiny problems was making it impossible to get anything done. It all came to a head one day not long before Christmas, when the elf in charge of toy production burst into Santa's office frantically shouting, "Santa, we don't have enough toy trains!" Santa had had enough. "Make more toy trains then, you moron!" he roared in a most unjolly manner, and he threw the elf out. Then Santa began stomping around his office, grumbling, as angry people will. "All right, that is it," he said to himself. "That is it! No more stupid little problems. Next person who comes to me with a stupid little problem, I'm going to tell him where to put his stupid little problem." Then he stopped, sat down in his chair, and leaned forward over his desk, face in his hands. "What am I going to do?" he moaned. "What am I going to do?" And just then, when it seemed as if nothing would ever get better, a golden light filled the room. Santa looked up, and there before him stood a beautiful angel, holding a Christmas tree. "Hello, Santa," said the angel in a voice filled with wisdom and gentleness. Then the angel nodded at the evergreen. "Where should I put this Christmas tree?" A priest wakes up on a Sunday morning to find the sun shining in a beautiful blue sky. He glances wistfully at his golf clubs, thinking how much he'd love to go play 18 instead of leading the sermon. He gives in to himself and calls his best deacon, telling him he's feeling unwell, so could the deacon lead the service for him? The priest grabs his clubs and heads out to the course. Jesus is looking down on this and turns to God and asks, "Dad, did you see that? He's forsaking church just to play golf. Surely you were going to do something?" Of course I am, replies God. Just you watch. The priest tees off on hole 1. It's the most perfect drive he's ever done. The ball flies through the air and lands neatly in the cup. The priest is stoked, his first ever hole-in-one. He moves to hole 2 and again, his tee off is straight and true, bouncing on the green before rolling calmly into the hole. The priest is over the moon, 2 back-to-back holes in 1. As he continues his game, he can do no wrong. He finishes the course in record time with a perfect 18 out of 18. Jesus looks at God confused. I don't get it, Dad. You said you were going to punish him, but instead you just gave him the most perfect game of golf in history. I sure did, says God, and who can he possibly tell about it? A guy spent 5 years traveling all around the world making a documentary on native dances. At the end of this time, he had every single native dance of every indigenous culture in the world on film, or so he thought. He wound up in Australia, in Alice Springs, so he popped into a pub for a well-earned beer. He got talking to one of the local Aborigines and told him about his project. The Aborigine asked the guy what he thought of the butcher dance. Butcher dance, he said, confused. What's that? What? You didn't see the butcher dance? No, I've never heard of it. Mate, you're crazy, the Aborigine replied. How can you say you filmed every dance if you haven't seen the butcher dance? I got a corroboree on film just the other week. Is that what you mean? No. The butcher dance is much more important than the corroboree. Oh, the man said, his curiosity piqued. Well, how can I see this butcher dance then? Mate, the butcher dance is way out in the wilderness. It'll take you many days of travel to go see it. Look, I've been everywhere from the forests of the Amazon to deepest, darkest Africa to the frozen wastes of the Arctic filming these dances. Nothing will prevent me from recording this one last dance. Okay, mate, the Aborigine replied, shrugging. You drive north along the highway towards Darwin. After you drive 197 miles, you'll see a dirt track veer off to the left. Follow the dirt track for 126 miles till you see a big, huge, dead gum tree. The biggest tree you've ever seen. Here you gotta leave the car because it's much too rough for driving. You strike out due west into the setting sun. Walk 3 days till you hit a creek. You follow this creek to the northwest. After 2 days, you'll find where the creek flows out of some rocky mountains, but it's much too difficult to cross the mountains there, though. So you head south for half of a day until you see a pass through the mountains. The pass is very difficult and very dangerous. It'll take you 2, maybe 3 days to get through it. On the other side, head northwest for 4 days until you reach a big, huge rock, 20 feet high and shaped like a man's head. From the rock, walk due west for 2 days, and then you'll find the village. You'll be able to see the butcher dance there. So the guy grabbed his camera crew and equipment and headed out. After a couple of hours, he found the dirt track. The track was in a shocking state, and he was forced to crawl along at a snail's pace, and so he didn't reach the tree until dusk, where he was forced to set up camp for the night. He set up bright and early the following morning. His spirits were high, and he was excited about the prospect of capturing on film this mysterious dance that he had never heard mention of before. True to the directions he had been given, he reached the creek after 3 days and followed it for another 2 until he reached the Rocky Mountains. The merciless sun was starting to take its toll, and the spirits of both himself and his crew were starting to flag, but wearily they trudged on, finally finding the pass through the mountains. Nothing would prevent him from completing his life's dream. The mountains proved to be every bit as treacherous as their guide had said, and at times they despaired of ever getting their bulky equipment through. But after 3.5 days of back-breaking effort, they finally forced their way clear and continued their long trek. When they reached the huge rock 4 days later, their water was running low and their feet were covered with blisters, but they steeled themselves and headed out on the last leg of their journey. 2 days later, they virtually staggered into the village. To their relief, the natives welcomed them and fed them and gave them fresh water, and they began to feel like new men. Once he recovered enough, the guy went before the village chief and told them that he came to film their butcher dance. "Oh, mate," he said, "very bad that you come today. Butcher dance was last night. You're too late. You missed the dance." "Well, when do you hold the next dance?" "Not till next year." "Well, I've come all this way. Couldn't you just hold an extra dance for me tonight?" No, the chief exclaimed. "Butcher dance is very holy. We only hold it once a year. You want to see the butcher dance? You come back next year." Understandably, the guy was devastated, but he had no other option but to head back to civilization and back home. The following year, he headed back to Australia and, determined not to miss out again, set out a week earlier than before. He was quite willing to spend a week in the village before the dance is performed in order to ensure he was present to witness it. But right from the start, things went wrong. Heavy rains that year turned the dirt track to mud, and the car got bogged down every few miles. Finally, they had to abandon their vehicles and slog through the mud on foot almost half the distance to the tree. They reached the creek in the mountains without any further problems, but halfway through the mountain pass, they were struck by a fierce storm that raged for several days, during which they were forced to cling forlornly to the mountainside until it subsided. Then, before they had traveled a mile out from the mountains, one of the crew sprained his ankle badly, slowing down the rest of their journey greatly. Eventually, having lost all sense of how long they had been traveling, they staggered into the village right at noon. "The butcher dance," the man gasped. "Please don't tell me I'm too late to see it." The chief recognized him and said, "No, white fella. Butcher dance is performed tonight. You came just in time." Relief beyond measure, the crew spent the rest of the afternoon setting up their equipment and preparing to capture the night's ritual on celluloid. As dusk fell, the natives started to cover their bodies in white paint and adorn themselves in all manner of birds' feathers and animal skins. Once darkness had settled fully over the land, the natives formed a circle around a huge roaring fire. A deathly hush descended over performers and spectators alike as a wizened old figure with elaborate swirling designs covered his body, entered the circle and began to chant. "What's he doing?" the man whispered to the chief. "Hush," the chief whispered back. "You're the first white man ever to see the most sacred of our rituals. You must remain silent. Holy man, he asks that the spirits of the dream world watch as we demonstrate our devotion to them through our dance, and, if they like our dancing, will they be so gracious as to watch over us and protect us for another year." The chanting of the holy man reached a stunning crescendo before he removed himself from the circle. The rhythmic pounding of drums boomed out across the land, and the natives began to sway to the stirring rhythm. The guide became caught up in the fervor of the moment himself. This was it. He realized beyond all doubt that his wait had not been in vain. He was about to witness the ultimate performance of rhythm and movement ever perceived by mankind. The chief strode to his position in the circle and, in a big booming voice, started to sing, "You put your right arm in, you put your right arm out, you put your right arm in, and you shake it all about." A man goes into a pet store in order to buy himself an exotic bird. He tells the clerk, I've had a number of pet birds in my life, and now I'm looking for something really special. Have anything I might like?" "Yes, sir, I do. I have a South American parrot rumored to have a vocabulary of over 400 words. He can talk about the weather, about sports, and about politics. But I might add, he is very expensive. Well, he sounds just perfect. Why don't you bring him out here?" The clerk goes into the back room and brings out an exquisite green bird with bright feathers and a dark golden beak. He sets the bird on a perch and excuses himself to take care of another customer in another part of the shop. The man looks at the bird and starts talking to it in the usual way. Pretty bird, probably want a cracker?" The bird replies in such beautiful English the man could hardly believe his ears. They have a conversation about the recent rains, they talk about the latest bills in Congress, and even talk about the latest Super Bowl. The man is dumbfounded. "I'll take him," he calls out to the clerk. "I'll take him home with me today." "Very good, sir," says the clerk. They conclude the transaction, and the man walks out with the parrot on his shoulder. As soon as they get to the man's home, the bird goes into a loud tirade of profanity. One four-letter word after another. On and on without end. The man can't believe it. "Look, bird, you didn't do any of this in the shop. I have guests coming over tonight. Don't you dare embarrass me with this kind of language." The bird continues on and on with the profane cursing. The man gets fed up and throws the parrot into his freezer. That will quiet him down, thinks the man. Sure enough, within a minute or two, the bird has gone completely silent. The man opens the freezer and the bird takes a deep bow. "Forgive me, sir, I will never talk like that again. I just do not know what got into me." The man is satisfied and motions for the bird to perch on his shoulder, and the man goes about his business. A few minutes later, the bird leans over to his ear and asks quietly, "Can I ask a question?" "Sure, what is it?" What exactly did the chicken do?" I think the Rainforest Cafe takes the whole rainforest theme too far. This one time I was sitting there eating my chicken tenders and they bulldozed 40% of the restaurant. People tell me I'm condescending. That means I talk down to people. Never tell a pun to a kleptomaniac. They're always taking things literally. Two nuns go driving between convents. They're driving through the country when a vampire jumps onto the hood. The pastor nun says, "Quick, show him your cross." The other nun says, "Get the fuck off my car!" You've heard of Murphy's Law, right? It says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But have you heard of Cole's Law? It's thinly sliced cabbage. "I stand corrected," said the man in the orthopedic shoes. "What did Grandpa say before he kicked the bucket?" "Want to see how far I can kick this bucket?" I remember fondly my granddaddy's last words. "Stop shaking that ladder, you fucking moron." Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. My dog is a rescue, which is a really self-righteous way of saying I bought a used dog. So there were two whales at a bar. The first whale says to the second, then the second whale says back to the first, "Go home, Frank, you're drunk." Four guys are hanging out. One of them says, "Hey, did you know 1 out of every 4 guys is gay?" Larry replies, "I hope it's Chuck, because he's really cute." The Buddha walks up to a hot dog stand and says, "Make me one with everything." Do you know why the Swedish Navy has barcodes on their ships? So they can Scandinavian. Why don't blind people skydive? Their dogs hate it. Why do ants never get sick? Because they have little antibodies. What's the most important part of a joke? Timing. How do you think the unthinkable? With an iceberg.